The first anomaly arrived as a sound, a low mechanical chord vibrating through the iron bones of the abandoned clock tower. Elias heard it while cataloging broken gears and dust-slick ledgers, a routine task in a city that had forgotten about precision and timekeeping long ago. The note deepened, resonant, deliberate, as if the tower itself had awakened to remember a duty it was never meant to abandon. He followed the vibration upward through the spiral staircase. Each step creaked like a protest. Wind funneled through shattered windows, tugging at his coat, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and metal. At the belfry, the source revealed itself. The clock face, cracked, opaque with grime, had begun to move backward, not by accident, with intention. The hour hand shifted in slow, mathematical sweeps. The minute hand jittered, then snapped into perfect retrograde motion. Gears beneath the floor clicked into alignment, each movement crisp and exact despite decades of neglect. The tower was working, and it was undoing. Elias placed his palm on the central column. Cold steel pulsed beneath skin, the vibration synchronized with his heartbeat. Then the world inverted, the skyline folded inward like paper, the tower dissolved into a lattice of numbers and spinning teeth. Sound disintegrated into silence so dense it seemed to press against his skull. When sensation returned, the city outside the window was different, smaller, cleaner, newly built. Gas lamps burned where LED adverts once loomed. The streets below bustled with horse carts and meticulous posture. He was still inside the tower, but the century had changed. The first journey frightened him. The second one didn't. Once he understood the rules, fear became calculation. The tower was a machine, not metaphorically, a literal instrument built to test time, to torque it, to map its elasticity. The ledgers he'd cataloged contained named scientists, financiers, architects, people who had planned experiments decades long and ethically ambiguous. Between sketches of escapements and pendulums, he found theoretical diagrams, vector paths through history, notes about acceptable interference, and warnings written in a hand that did not believe in its own restraint. He also found instructions. Every passage required a correction. The mechanism did not move without purpose. It chose fractures, moments where consequence wavered, minor decisions with disproportionate effects. In each era, Elias arrived with a problem left unfinished and a choice that demanded resolution. The machine never asked for heroism. It simply asked for precision. He complied because the alternative was chaos. The third shift deposited him in a laboratory smelling of ozone and lacquered wood. A mathematician stared at a blackboard filled with incomplete variables, the chalk trembling in his grip. A telegraph wire on the workbench spat and hissed, cycling a signal that threatened to overload. Elias recognized the failure path from the ledger sketch, a small electrical fire, a ruined prototype, a bitter feud that would paralyze two research institutions for 30 years. He lifted the right fuse from a tin tray, positioned it on the board, and slid it into the junction before the wire peaked. A click, a hum, stability. The mathematician exhaled, unaware of intervention. The argument that destroyed a collaboration never occurred. The future nudged into a narrower, more coherent corridor. Elias watched. The moment seal shut, invisible and absolute. Then the tower recalled him. He learned to read the rhythm. First the vibration, then the collapse, then the reconstruction of a different century around him. Wars, markets, betrayals, reconciliations. He walked through eras like corridors in a house built by someone who mistrusted doors. The tasks sharpened, a misfiled report that prevented a social program from existing, a single vote cast out of resentment, a bridge inspection rushed because a foreman feared embarrassment. Each moment small, each moment heavy. Time, he realized, did not fracture in grand catastrophes. It fractured in haste and ego, and he was becoming the instrument that corrected it. The tower was not neutral. It never said so, but the pattern betrayed intent. The machine preserved continuity, not morality. It favored efficiency. It tolerated injustices if they produced stability. Elias began to dislike its criteria long before he admitted it. He returned from the year 2149 with ash embedded in the seams of his coat. The horizon had burned not in spectacle, but in resignation. A wildfire creeping through an unmanaged corridor of dry forest left unregulated after decades of austerity policy. The list had described the failure as structural misallocation. The correction had been mundane. Persuade a planning clerk in 2093 not to erase a budget line. The clerk signed the document without looking at Elias's face. The tower hummed with satisfaction. Elias resented its approval. On his next arrival, he found himself in a small apartment where a woman sat at a table with two sealed letters in front of her. One offered escape to a city that would grant her education. The other kept her bound to a home defined by obligation and silence. The ledger claimed her decision influenced nothing measurable. The tower stayed still. The mechanism waited. He understood the implication. It was unwilling to intervene because the consequence graph showed no collapse of infrastructure, no economic instability, no political destabilization. Her life did not register as systemically relevant. Elias sat across from her anyway. He did not touch the letters. He spoke about risk and autonomy, about the narrow corridor carved by fear and habit, about futures owed to no one. His voice stayed calm and unsentimental. She listened, not as a subject of a cosmic experiment, but as a person weighing herself honestly. She chose the letter that took her away. The tower pulled him back with a severity he had never felt, a vibration hard as reprimand. When the world collapsed into gears again, there was no sense of precision. The motion was abrupt, corrective, punitive. In the restored present, the ledgers had changed. Entire pages had been rewritten. A margin note appeared in red ink, unauthorized. Intervention, outcome non-critical. He closed the book. He did not apologize. Time travel did not erode him physically. It eroded assumptions. The more he moved through centuries, the more he saw that history was neither destiny nor accident. It was maintenance, and glamorous, relentless maintenance performed by systems and choices so ordinary they vanished from memory. The tower presumed stewardship belonged to itself. He stopped believing that, on a winter dawn, the mechanism delivered him to a construction site on the outskirts of a city he recognized only by river. Shape, a team debated the placement of foundation beams for a public archive. A misalignment here would trigger subsidence decades later, destroying millions of records and severing generational knowledge. The correction was obvious. The workers were exhausted. They wanted the easier layout. Elias gave precise instructions, firm and unyielding. The crew complied, not out of deference, but because his reasoning was exact and irrefutable. The building would stand. The records would endure. The tower hummed, pleased. He didn't return. The vibrations surged again, louder, urgent, but the world stayed intact. The machine had expected obedience, not inertia. Elias ignored the call. The anomaly intensified, a frequency meant to tear him back across centuries. He knelt, pressed his hands to the wet soil, and grounded himself in the present. The tower could not move him without consent. He understood that only because he resisted. The sound receded. Silence asserted itself not as absence but as control. He had severed the chain when he climbed the spiral staircase again in his own time. His own city, the clock tower, waited, still and patient. Dust reclaimed its gears. The hands pointed nowhere meaningful. He opened the final ledger. The red ink had faded. The mechanism had lost authority along with function. He considered destroying it. Instead, he documented everything. He wrote the system honestly, its strengths, its failures, its blind spots without drama or mysticism. He described each intervention, each quiet hinge on which eras turned, each life erased from calculation but heavy with significance. He left no illusions about neutrality. He locked the ledgers in the archive he had helped preserve. Then he left the tower and walked into a city that no longer felt accidental. He knew time didn't need custodians who hid behind machinery. It needed people willing to recognize when small decisions amplified through generations, when precision mattered more than spectacle, when choice required responsibility rather than permission. The clock tower never awakened again, but the work of time, the meticulous, relentless correction of what might otherwise decay, continued. Everywhere, uncelebrated and essential, carried by those who understood that history did not move on its own, it was moved,